Right now, something is drifting at the ocean's surface that is two different animals at once. A small blue creature, no bigger than your thumb, floating upside down, wearing weapons it stole from something that could kill you. We like to think of a species as a sealed box. One animal, one body, one set of instructions, but in the sea those boxes leak, species cross, bodies merge, and a single animal can turn out to be a crowd. Some of these aren't even crossbreeds. They run on another kingdom's machinery. Let's start with the very one we made on purpose. Picture two animals in the same tank. One is sleek and familiar, a bottlenose dolphin. The face you've seen 100 times. The built-in smile, the curved beak, the body that fits in your imagination the moment someone says the word dolphin. Now put something beside it that is more than twice its size. Darker, heavier, longer. A body that looks like it belongs to a small whale, moving with a slow, muscular calm that makes the dolphin next to it look nervous. Those two animals should not produce a calf together. Everything you know about species says so, and yet they did. And the calf lived. And then the calf grew up and had a baby of its own. That's where this whole story really starts. Not with the fact that the cross happened, but with the part nobody expected. It worked. It kept working. It passed down the line. We have a name for the result. A Wholphin. And the name itself is the first trap, because it makes you picture something impossible. A dolphin welded to a whale. That's not what this is. To understand why the cross even held together, you have to look hard at that second animal, the big dark one, and realize that it's been lying to us with its own name for a very long time. We call it a false killer whale. Say that out loud and your brain does something automatic. It hears whale. It pictures something in the same family as an orca, or maybe a smaller cousin of the giants that sing across ocean basins. And that instinct is exactly wrong. The false killer whale is not a whale in the way you're imagining. It's a dolphin. A large, powerful, deep-bodied member of the dolphin family, wearing a whale-shaped silhouette. The name came from its skull, which reminded early observers of a killer whales. So it got filed next to the giants in our imagination, when biologically it never left the dolphins at all. And that single misunderstanding is the key to the entire chapter, because when a bottlenose dolphin and a false killer whale breed, it looks, to us, like a cross between two completely different kinds of ocean animal, a dolphin and a whale, two boxes that should never open into each other. But that's the land brain talking. That's us reading the names instead of the animals. Underneath the names, these two are far closer relatives than they look. Same family, same broad blueprint, different sizes, different habits, different silhouettes, but built from the same underlying set of instructions, close enough that those instructions can still fit together and produce a living, breathing calf. So the shock isn't that two wildly different creatures merged. The shock is that we mistook two relatives for strangers and only noticed how close they were when they refused to stay apart. Now hold on to the size difference because it's about to matter more than it seems. Imagine the mother. In these crosses, the female is usually the false killer whale, the big one. Now imagine her carrying a calf sired by an animal less than half her size. The pregnancy itself is a strange collision of scales, and when the calf arrives, it lands somewhere in between, bigger than a bottlenose, smaller than its mother, a body that split the difference. The length pulled one way, the shape pulled another, the tooth count landing somewhere neither parent would recognize as their own. That tooth count is the kind of detail that gives a hybrid away. A bottlenose has a certain number of teeth. A false killer whale has fewer, and the Wholphin, sitting between them, ended up with a number that belongs to neither a quiet piece of arithmetic written into its jaw that says, without any DNA test, that this animal is a blend. Look at it swimming, and you might not catch it. It moves like a dolphin, it behaves like a dolphin. It's fast, curious, social. But line it up against both parents. The small, sleek one on the left, the big, dark one on the right, the in-between animal in the middle. And the compromise becomes obvious. It's not a scaled-up dolphin. It's not a scaled-down whale. It's a third thing that only exists because two animals we thought were far apart turned out to be neighbors. And here's the part that should stop you. If this were a mule, the story would end at the calf. A mule is the classic hybrid. A horse crossed with a donkey. It's strong, it's useful, and it's a dead end. Mules are almost always sterile. Two species meet, produce one impressive animal, and the line stops there. That's the rule most of us carry in our heads about hybrids. They're one-offs, nature's dead ends, impressive mistakes that can't repeat. The Holfen broke that rule. The cross didn't just produce a healthy calf, it produced a fertile female, an animal that could grow up and have offspring of her own. And did let that settle. The thing we're told hybrids can't do, this one did. The dead end had a door in it. That's the difference between a mule and this. And the reason comes back, again, to those misleading names. A horse and a donkey are separated by a genetic gap wide enough that their chromosomes don't line up cleanly. So the hybrid's biology can't build working reproductive cells, and the line dies with that one animal. A bottlenose dolphin and a false killer whale are separated by a much smaller gap, close enough that the instructions still match, close enough that a female Holfen's body can do what a mule's never could, carry the line forward. So the fertility isn't a miracle, it's a measurement. It's telling you exactly how close these two different animals really are. The healthier and more fertile the hybrid, the smaller the true distance between its parents. No matter what their names, their sizes, or their silhouettes suggest. And that reframes everything about that first tank. The two animals didn't look like they belonged together. One could fit in your arms as a calf. The other could pull a grown human across a lagoon. One is the face on every dolphin poster. The other got shelved next to killer whales by a naming accident. Everything on the surface said, different worlds. And underneath, the biology said, same book, different chapters. But notice what made this one possible. People. This cross happened under human care, in captivity, where two animals that might rarely share close quarters in the open sea were kept together long enough for it to happen. We arranged the conditions. We were watching when the calf arrived. We could confirm the parents, count the teeth, follow the fertility down another generation. This is the controlled version. The one with a clear beginning, clear parents, a clear paper trail. Which leaves a much larger, much darker question hanging over the rest of this. Because if two different ocean animals can cross and breed and pass it down when we're standing right there, what happens when the sea does the same thing on its own? Out past the tanks, out in open water, where no one arranges anything, where no one is counting teeth, where two species can meet, blur, and vanish back into the blue before any human ever knows it happened, the Holfen is the safe version of this story. The version with a name, a lineage, a witness. The next one has none of that. Because out there, in the wild, in water nobody was watching, two sharks that split apart long ago, two ancient designs we thought were fixed and finished, quietly started doing the exact same thing. And nobody arranged it. Nobody expected it. We only found out because someone happened to look closely at a fish that seemed, at first glance, completely ordinary. Start with what a shark is supposed to be. Not an animal. An argument. The classic line you've heard a dozen times. Sharks are perfect. Sharks are finished. Sharks are the design evolution stopped fixing because it got everything right the first time. Ancient, unchanging. A body so well built it's been cruising the oceans since before trees, before dinosaurs, before almost anything you can name. We hand sharks this reputation like a compliment. The predator that didn't need to keep experimenting. That reputation is about to work against you, because if sharks are fixed, sealed, done, two separate shark species should stay two separate shark species. They split apart at some point deep in the past, went their own ways, wrote their own instructions. The gap between them is supposed to be permanent. That's what ancient and unchanging is supposed to mean. Two lineages that haven't merged in millions of years shouldn't suddenly start merging now. And yet, in open water, they have. Wild shark hybrids exist, not in a tank, not arranged by anyone. Out in the sea, swimming free, two shark species that we'd cataloged as distinct turned out to be crossing, producing animals that carry the mix of both. No human. Set it up. No lagoon, no captivity, no watching. It just happened. And it kept happening. And for a long time, nobody noticed at all. That's the part that should get under your skin. Not that it's possible, that it was invisible. Here's how something that big hides in plain sight. Picture two sharks that look, to your eye, almost identical. Same broad shape, same coloring, same way of moving. If you pulled both out of the water and laid them side by side on a deck, you'd struggle to tell them apart without knowing exactly what to check. To us, they're one animal wearing two labels. The difference between them lives in details most people never look at. A subtle divergence in range, in the fine print of their bodies, in the genetics you can't see by looking. So when the two of them cross, the hybrid doesn't come out looking like a monster. It doesn't come out looking like anything unusual at all. It looks like a shark. An ordinary, unremarkable shark, swimming in water where you'd expect to find exactly that kind of shark. The blend is buried inside a body that gives nothing away, which means you cannot find these animals by looking at them. Think about what that does to the search. With the Wholphin, the tooth count gave it away. You could count, and the number was wrong for either parent. But when the two parent species are nearly identical to begin with, the hybrid's body sits comfortably inside the normal range of both. Nothing looks off. Nothing stands out. The animal is, to all appearances, just a shark being a shark. The only way to catch it is to stop trusting your eyes and read the code underneath. This is where the genetics comes in, and where the story gets its teeth. Because you can take a shark that looks completely normal, sample its DNA, and find two different species written into the same animal. The outside says one thing. The inside says two. And once you can read that code, a fish that would have slipped past every net of human attention suddenly announces itself. This one is a cross, and so is that one, and so is the next. But confirming that these hybrids exist only sharpens the real question, not what they are. Why now? Because this is the part that should unsettle you more than any single animal. If sharks split apart long ago and stayed apart, and if we're only now finding them blending in the wild, something changed. The old separation held for a very long time. Now, in our moment, it's leaking. And when two species that used to keep their distance start overlapping and crossing, the honest first question a biologist asks isn't about the sharks. It's about the water. What moved? What shifted? What pushed two animals that used to stay apart into the same stretch of sea? One likely answer lives in the ranges. Every shark species has a territory, a band of ocean, where the temperature, the food, the conditions all sit right for its body. Draw those bands on a map, and historically, two closely related species might barely touch. One prefers slightly warmer water. One prefers slightly cooler. They live along the same coast but staggered. A warm water specialist here, a cooler water specialist there. an overlap zone thin enough that they rarely mingle. Now start moving those bands. Warm the water, and the cooler water species may drift toward the poles, chasing the temperature it's built for. Its range slides. The overlap zone, the thin strip where the two species meet, widens. Suddenly, two animals that used to brush past each other at the edges are sharing a lot more water, more contact, more chances to meet, more chances to cross. A hybrid that would have been almost impossible when the two ranges barely touched becomes a real, repeatable event when those ranges start bleeding into each other. And here's where the hybrid stops being a curiosity and starts looking like a strategy. Think about what a blended body might actually do. One parent handles warmer water well. One handles cooler water well. Their hybrid carries a mix of both sets of instructions, which could mean a body that isn't locked to a single narrow band of temperature, a body that copes across a wider stretch of shifting ocean than either parent could manage alone. In a sea that's moving, being tied to one exact set of conditions is a liability. Being able to function across two might be an advantage. That's not evolution slowly polishing a perfect design over ages. That's the finished animal reaching for something new right now in response to a changing world. The sharks we called unchanging are experimenting. And the experiment is a direct reaction to water that won't hold still. Sit with how strange that inverts the reputation. We admired sharks for being fixed, finished, beyond the need to change. And the wild hybrids are quiet evidence that the fixity was never the whole truth. That when the pressure comes, even these ancient designs will blur their own boundaries to keep up. The compliment we handed them turns out to be conditional. They're stable when the world is stable. When it moves, so do they. None of this comes with a clean paper trail, and that matters. Unlike the Wholphin, captive, watched, its parents known, its lineage followed, these wild hybrids arrive with almost no story attached. We don't get to watch the cross happen. We don't know how the two parents met, how often it occurs, whether these blended sharks go on to breed themselves or fade out in a generation. We find the result, written in DNA after the fact, and everything before that is inference, drawn from ranges and temperatures and the logic of a warming sea. The animal is real. The cause is a strong, careful reading of the conditions around it, not a filmed event. But the shape of the story is unmistakable. We've now watched the hybrid step out of the tank and into open water. From something people arranged to something the ocean did on its own, unsupervised, while we weren't looking. And possibly because we changed the water without meaning to, and noticed the trick that made these wild sharks so hard to catch. The two parents looked almost the same. The hybrid hid inside that resemblance. The whole thing stayed invisible precisely because the animals were so similar to begin with. So now flip it. What happens when the two parents don't look alike at all? When they're not near identical sharks, but two animals so different, so specialized, so unmistakably themselves, that no one would ever confuse them? Two Arctic whales, one of them carrying the single strangest tooth in the ocean, the other with a face built on a completely different plan. You'd think a cross between those two would be impossible to miss. And in a way, it was impossible to miss, because it left behind a skull that no one could name. Somewhere in a collection, there was a skull nobody could explain. Not broken, not deformed, just wrong. It had the general size of an Arctic whale, but the details didn't line up with anything on the shelf. The teeth were the problem. They sat in the jaw at strange angles, the wrong shape, the wrong arrangement. Not quite one species, not quite another. Someone looked at it, couldn't place it, and set it aside. For years it was just an oddity, a skull that didn't fit its own catalog. Then someone read its DNA, and the oddity turned into one of the strangest confirmed animals in the Arctic. To feel why this one lands so hard, You have to picture the two animals it came from, because these are not near identical sharks hiding in each other's shadow. These two could not look less alike. The first is the narwhal. You know it even if you've never seen one because it carries the most improbable feature in the ocean. A single, long, spiraled tusk, driving straight out of its head, twisting like something from a myth. That tusk isn't a horn. It's a tooth. One enormous, overgrown tooth that pushes through the animal's lip and grows out into the cold water in a perfect helix. Everything about the narwhal is built around that specialization. It is, by any measure, one of the most committed, most extreme designs any whale has ever evolved. The second is the beluga, all curves where the narwhal is all line, pale, almost white, with a rounded forehead and a face soft enough to look like it's smiling. No tusk, a mouthful of ordinary pegged teeth, a body built for a different set of habits entirely. Put a tusked mythic narwhal beside a smooth white beluga, and your instinct screams that these are two separate stories. One went so far down the road of that single spiral tooth that it seems locked in, too specialized, too committed to that one bizarre feature to ever blend with anything. That tusk feels like a wall. How could an animal built around something so extreme cross with an animal that has nothing like it? And yet the skull says they did. Here's the first thing that makes this confirmation so unusual. There was no living animal to point at. No sighting. No photograph of a strange whale surfacing between ice floes. The entire case rests on bone. A single skull sitting in a collection, carrying a mix of features that belong to two animals at once. That's all anyone had to work with. Not a body swimming in the sea. A skeleton on a shelf. So how do you confirm a hybrid from one skull? You can't do it by eye alone. And this skull is exactly why. Looking at it, you can see it's strange. You can see the teeth are wrong. But strange isn't proof. Plenty of individual animals are odd. A weird skull could be a sick narwhal, a deformed beluga, a one-off. To turn an oddity into an answer, you need to go underneath the bone, into the genetics. And that's what finally settled it. The DNA carried both species, narwhal and beluga, written into the same animal. The skull wasn't a deformity, it was a cross. And once the genetics confirmed what the animal was, the skull itself became readable in a way it hadn't been before. Because now you knew what you were looking at, you could ask the sharper question. When these two very different whales blended, what came through from each? This is where the story does something you don't expect. You'd assume the tusk would dominate. It's the narwhal's signature, the most extreme feature either parent has. If you're imagining this hybrid, you're probably imagining some version of that spiral tooth. Maybe smaller, maybe stranger, but there. That's the instinct. The dramatic feature wins. It didn't come through that way. The single most narwhal thing about the narwhal, that unmistakable spiraled tusk, is not what defines this animal. The tusk was not the headline. Instead, the real evidence lived in the rest of the teeth. The narwhal's mouth is specialized around that one driving tooth. The beluga's mouth is a straightforward set of pegs, and the hybrid's teeth were something in between, arranged in a pattern that belonged to neither parent, a compromise written into the jaw. That's the detail that first made the skull impossible to file. Not a dramatic horn, a mouthful of teeth that split the difference between two feeding systems. And those in-between teeth are not just a curiosity. They're a clue about how the animal lived. Because teeth are tools, and the two parents use very different ones. The way a narwhal feeds and the way a beluga feeds are shaped by the mouths they've got. So an animal with a blended mouth would have had a blended way of getting food. Not hunting quite like a narwhal, not quite like a beluga, but working the water in some third way its mixed anatomy allowed. The skull isn't just telling you two species met. It's hinting at how the resulting animal had to make a living with a body that was a compromise between two specialists. That's a real anatomical consequence sitting right there in the bone. Now step back and ask the question this skull forces. How does a cross like this even happen? These aren't two look-alike sharks bumping into each other in an overlap zone. These are two of the most distinct whales in the Arctic. The answer is that distinct looking doesn't mean distant. Narwhals and belugas share the same cold, tight world. The Arctic isn't a large stage. Ice, cold, a limited band of livable water. It presses animals together. These two species overlap in range, move through the same channels, and both are social, both travel in groups. Put two social Arctic whales in the same water often enough, over enough time, and the wall between them turns out to be lower than that tusk makes it look. The specialization is dramatic on the outside. Underneath, they remained close enough that a cross could happen and hold, which quietly echoes something from before. The false killer whale looked like a whale and wasn't. The hybrid sharks looked identical and were two species, and now the narwhal and beluga look like two utterly separate stories, and turn out to be close enough to blend. Over and over, the surface lies about the distance. Appearance says one thing. The biology underneath says the boundary was thinner than we thought. But hold on to what this confirmation actually rests on, because it's a different kind of evidence than the last two chapters. The wholphin we watched, the wild sharks we sampled from living animals. This whale we know from a single skull and the DNA inside it. No one filmed it. No one watched it feed with those in-between teeth. Everything about how it moved, how it hunted, how long it lived, whether there were ever others like it. All of that sits beyond the evidence. We have the shape of the animal and the code that proves what it was. The life it lived is inference, drawn from bone. And that turns out to be the unsettling gift hiding in this chapter, because it means you can confirm an entire animal, a real, once-living creature that swam the Arctic, from a skeleton and a strand of DNA, long after the animal itself is gone. You don't need to see it alive. The blend is written permanently into the body it left behind. One skull, misfiled as an oddity, rewrote what these two hyper-specialized whales are capable of. So we've now proven a cross from a living calf, from wild DNA, and from a single skull on a shelf. 3 ways of catching the ocean blending 2 species into one. Each time, the animal was genuinely a hybrid. 2 sets of instructions, 1 body, which sets up the exact trap you're now primed to fall into. Because there's an animal in the deep sea that looks more stitched together than any of these. A face that seems assembled from spare parts. A bit of shark, a bit of something else, a bit of nothing you can name. Every instinct you've just built says hybrid. 2 animals fused into one. And that instinct is about to be completely, revealingly wrong. Bring one up into the light, and your brain tries to take it apart. There's the body of something shark-like, that same cartilage-built, tapering shape you know from 100 nature documentaries. But the face is wrong. The eyes are huge, green, and strangely dead, catching the ROV light like polished glass. The snout is off. The mouth doesn't open into rows of replaceable teeth. It's sealed into something more like a beak, hard plates instead of blades. And running across the whole head are these fine grooves and channels, like seams. Like the animal was assembled from separate pieces and the joins never fully closed. It looks stitched together. It looks like a hybrid. And after everything you've just seen, the wholphin, the wild sharks, the whale built from a single skull, every instinct you have is screaming the same word, cross. 2 animals fused into one. A shark crossed with a bony fish, a blend of something and something else. This is the moment to stop trusting that instinct, because this animal is here to break it. We call it a chimera, a ghost shark. And the name chimera is a joke the animal is playing on you. Because a chimera, in the old stories, was a monster stitched from several creatures at once. That's exactly what it looks like. A patchwork, an assembly, the most hybrid-looking animal in the sea. It is not a hybrid. It's not a cross of anything. It's not a shark bred with a bony fish. It's not two lineages that met and merged. It's one animal, one lineage, one continuous story. And that story is far older and far stranger than hybrid could ever be. Because the chimera isn't a mixture of the sharks you know. It's what branched off from them a very long time ago and never came back. Here's the reversal that resets this whole chapter. Sharks and chimeras are both built from cartilage instead of bone. That's the family resemblance, the thing that makes the chimera look shark-adjacent. But go back far enough down the tree and you reach a split. One deep, ancient fork. On one side, the animals that became the sharks and rays we know. On the other, the animals that became chimeras. They separated deep in time. Long before the split, the lineages went their own way and never rejoined. Everything about the chimera that looks like a mashup of a shark and something else isn't a blend at all. It's an old design, a separate branch that kept features the sharks eventually abandoned, and evolved its own that no shark ever had. So when you look at that stitched-together face and read it as two animals combined, you've got the arrow of time exactly backwards. Nothing was combined. This is one of the oldest cartilaginous stories still swimming, a design that split off, held its ground, and just kept being itself while the rest of the family changed around it. That reframes every spare part on its face. Take the mouth. It doesn't have the shark's endless conveyor of replaceable teeth. Instead, it has hard tooth plates, flat grinding surfaces built to crush rather than slice. That's not a defect, and it's not borrowed from some other fish. It's a tool for a specific life. Down where the chimera lives, on the dark seabed, a lot of the food is armored and slow, hard-shelled things sitting in the sediment. You don't need slashing teeth for that. You need crushers. The beak-like mouth that makes the animal look assembled is actually a precise answer to what's edible in the dark. Now the eyes. Enormous, pale, glassy. The feature that makes people call it a ghost. Those eyes are built to gather whatever scraps of light exist in a place that has almost none. Go deep enough, and sunlight is essentially gone. An eye that size isn't for seeing the way you see. It's for scraping meaning out of near total darkness. The animal looks haunted because it's built for a world where light barely reaches. And those fine seams across its head, the channels that look like the joins in a patchwork, are maybe the most important detail of all, and the most misread. They're not stitching. They're sensory canals. Networks of pores and channels that let the animal feel the faint electric fields given off by other living things. In the dark, where eyes only take you so far, this is how you find a buried, hidden meal. The chimera reads the electricity of the animals around it. Those seams are one of its primary senses, wired across its face. What looks like the mark of assembly is actually the animal's way of sensing prey it can't see. Feel what just happened. Every single feature that made this animal look like a hybrid turned out to be a purpose-built tool for a slow, deep, dark, low-energy life. The crushing plates, the light-gathering eyes, the electric-sensing seams, none of it is borrowed. None of it is combined. It's all one coherent design, tuned for one specific and unforgiving place. And the life that design supports is its own kind of strange. This is not a fast, restless hunter. It's slow, deliberate, built to spend little and take little from an environment that offers little. Some chimeras lay eggs, sealing an embryo inside a hard case, a long capsule left in the cold and dark to develop on its own time. No speed, no spectacle. Just a patient, ancient design doing what it has done for an immense stretch of time, largely unbothered by everything that came and went above it. So why does this chapter matter so much? Why stop the parade of real hybrids to spend time on one that isn't? Because the chimera teaches you the exact lesson you need before the rest of this goes any further. It teaches you that appearance lies. The most stitched together spare parts, obviously a hybrid animal in the ocean, is not a hybrid at all. If you'd trusted your eyes, if you'd done what feels natural and read combined creature straight off its face, you'd have built the wrong animal entirely. You'd have invented a cross that never happened and missed a lineage older than almost anything you could name. And that should make you suspicious of the whole idea you've been carrying. Up to now, hybrid has meant something you could point to, a blend you could see or measure, the in-between size, the wrong tooth count, the mixed skull. The chimera says, that's not where the real strangeness lives. The animal that looks the most impossible is the most conventional single lineage. Looks are a dead end, which means if there's a real impossible combination in the ocean, a genuine case of one animal being two things at once, it won't announce itself with a stitched-together face. It won't be about appearance at all. It'll be hiding somewhere you're not looking. Not in how an animal looks, in what an animal carries, in what it holds inside its own body that plainly belongs to something else. And once you start looking there, not at shapes, but at stolen equipment, the ocean gets much stranger fast, because there's a creature drifting at the surface right now, soft and small and beautiful, that is armed with weapons it did not grow. Weapons it took, intact and still working, from one of the most dangerous animals in the open sea, and stored inside its own body, more concentrated than in the animal it robbed. That's where the real hybrids begin. Not with looks, with theft. Turn it over in your hand and you'd never believe what it does. It's small, smaller than your thumb, soft-bodied, no shell, no armor, no visible teeth. And it's one of the most beautiful things in the open ocean. A shape like a tiny blue dragon, with finger-like arms fanning out from its sides, tipped in silver, glowing electric blue against the water. It looks like jewelry. It looks like something built only to be admired. Touch it wrong, and it can hurt you worse than the animal it ate. This is the blue dragon, Glaucus atlanticus, a sea slug. And stop on that word for a second, because sea slug should tell you everything about how helpless this thing ought to be. No shell, no speed, no hard parts. A soft, drifting scrap of an animal floating at the surface of the open sea, one of the most exposed places to live anywhere on Earth. Everything at that surface can see it. Everything faster than it, which is almost everything, could eat it. By the rules that should govern a body like this, the blue dragon should be a snack. Instead, it's a predator that eats one of the most feared animals in the open ocean. And it does it by breaking a rule you've never questioned. Here's the rule. Venom is something you grow. A stinging animal builds its own weapons. A snake makes its venom. A scorpion makes its sting. A jellyfish grows its own stinging cells. The weapon comes from inside. It's part of the animal's own body, manufactured by the animal itself. That feels so obvious it's barely worth saying. Of course, your weapons are your own. The blue dragon doesn't make its weapons. It steals them. And it steals them from the Portuguese man-o'-war. a drifting horror of the open sea, trailing tentacles loaded with stinging cells potent enough to badly injure a human. The man-o-war is exactly the kind of thing everything else in the ocean tries to avoid. It's a wall of venom hanging in the water. The blue dragon swims straight at it and eats it. Sit with how backwards that is. A soft, tiny, shell-less slug hunts down an animal armored in venom, an animal whose entire defense is that touching it is a catastrophe, and consumes it. Not the safe parts, the dangerous parts, the stinging tentacles, packed with the very weapons that make the man-o-war deadly. Now here's the mechanism, and it's the part that turns this from a strange meal into something that shouldn't be possible. The man-o-war's sting comes from microscopic capsules called nematocysts. Tiny loaded harpoons, each one a coiled, venom-tipped thread waiting to fire. When the blue dragon eats the man-o-war, it doesn't destroy those capsules. It doesn't digest them. It moves them. It carries these stinging cells, intact and still loaded, through its own body and stores them, alive and functional, in the tips of those finger-like arms. Special sacs at the ends of its arms become an armory of borrowed weapons, harvested from its prey and held ready to fire. The animal's own defense system is made of another animal's organs. That's the real hybrid this whole story has been building toward. Not a genetic cross, not a blended skull, a functional hybrid, an animal that is half itself and half its prey, wielding equipment it did not grow and could never grow on its own. The blue dragon is a slug that made itself venomous by wearing the man-o-war's weapons. And it doesn't just store them, it concentrates them. This is the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. When the blue dragon collects those stinging cells and packs them into the tips of its arms, it gathers them into a smaller space than they occupied in the sprawling tentacles of the man-o-war. Concentrated, bundled. Which means a sting from a blue dragon can deliver a punch that feels disproportionate to its size, because it's firing weapons taken from a much larger, much more dangerous animal, packed tight into a body barely bigger than a coin. The victim didn't just borrow a gun, it refined the ammunition. We should be careful here because worse than the original is easy to say and hard to pin down. The exact intensity depends on too many things to promise a clean number. But the principle is solid and strange enough on its own. This animal took another creature's weapons, stored them still working, and packed them into a smaller space. However you measure it, the sting in your hand did not come from the slug. It came from the thing the slug ate. Now look at the whole animal again, because every beautiful thing about it turns out to be a weapon or a trick. Take the color. That electric blue, that silver. It's not decoration. Flip the animal in your mind and notice it's blue on one side and silvery gray on the other. And notice how it floats, upside down, belly to the sky, back to the deep. The blue side faces up. From above, from a bird's eye looking down at the water, the blue blends into the blue of the sea surface. The silver side faces down. From below, from a fish looking up toward the bright surface, the silver blends into the shimmer of the light. The animal is camouflaged in both directions at once. Its beauty is a disappearing act. The thing that makes it gorgeous in your hand makes it nearly invisible in the water. And that upside-down float is its own small piece of impossibility. This animal doesn't have a swim bladder in the way a fish does. It keeps itself at the surface by swallowing a bubble of air and holding it inside its gut, a pocket of swallowed gas that keeps it hanging at the exact border between water and sky, drifting belly up on the surface tension carried by wind and current across the open ocean. It doesn't swim to its prey so much as drift into it, both of them pushed across the surface by the same wind, which closes a strange loop. The blue dragon and the man-o-war drift the same way, pushed by the same wind, ending up in the same patches of open sea. The predator and its prey are carried together, and when they meet, the smaller, softer, slower one wins, by eating the other's defenses and making them its own. Feel how completely this rewrites what an animal can be. Up to now, hybrid meant genetics. Two species crossing, two sets of instructions in one body. The blue dragon isn't genetically anything but a slug, and yet it's functionally a chimera in the real sense, part slug, part man-o-war, armed with an organ system it harvested from its own food. It didn't inherit its weapons. It ate them. And that cracks open a much larger question, because if an animal can steal another animal's weapons, take a working organ system out of its prey and run it inside its own body, then the boundary between my body and another creature's body isn't as solid as it looked. The blue dragon borrows a weapon. That's dramatic, but a weapon is a single tool. What if something could borrow more than a tool? What if an animal could steal not a weapon, but an engine, the actual machinery another organism uses to make energy? Not the sting of another animal, but the power source of another whole kingdom of life? Because there's a sea slug, a cousin of this one, soft and small and unassuming, that eats plants and doesn't fully digest them either. It pulls something out of them, something it keeps alive inside its own skin, and what it steals isn't a weapon. It's the ability to live on sunlight. This one doesn't drift at the surface looking like a dragon. This one sits on the seafloor, looking like a leaf. It's a sea slug, a cousin of the blue dragon. Same broad family of soft, shell-less ocean animals, but you would never guess they're related, because this one has gone completely green. Not painted green, not green like camouflage smeared on top, green all the way through, a deep living green, with its body flattened and rippled at the edges into the exact shape of a leaf. Some of them are so leaf-like that if you found one lying in a tide pool, your eye would slide right over it, filing it as a scrap of seaweed. And that green is the tell, because green, in the living world, means one thing. It means the machinery of photosynthesis. It means the thing that plants do and animals don't. And this is an animal. Here's the rule this creature breaks, and it might be the most basic rule you carry. Plants make their own food. Animals have to eat. That's practically the definition of the two. A plant sits in the light and builds sugar out of sunlight, water, and air. It feeds itself out of nothing but photons. An animal can't do that. An animal has to go find food, catch it, consume it, break down other living things to stay alive. The line between makes its own energy from light and must eat other organisms is one of the oldest, cleanest lines we draw across all of life. Plants on one side, animals on the other. This slug stands on the line with a foot on both sides, because it eats algae. That part is normal, an animal eating a plant. But it doesn't just digest the algae and move on. As it feeds, it does something almost surgical. It pulls the chloroplasts out of the algae, the tiny green engines inside plant cells, the actual machinery that turns sunlight into food. And instead of destroying them, it keeps them. It moves them into its own tissues, threads them through its own body, and keeps them alive and working inside itself. That's why it's green. The color isn't the slug's. It's the color of thousands of stolen plant engines running inside an animal. We have a name for this theft. Kleptoplasty, stolen plastids, stolen chloroplasts, and the word matters, because it's precise about what's happening. The slug is not becoming a plant. It hasn't grown its own chloroplasts. It has robbed them from something else and installed them, still functioning, in its own body. It's running borrowed machinery. And this is where it stops being a curiosity and becomes genuinely hard to believe. Those stolen chloroplasts keep working inside the slug. They keep photosynthesizing. They keep catching light and producing energy. Not for a few minutes, not for an hour, but for a long stretch of time. In some of these slugs, the captured chloroplasts stay alive and productive for weeks, in some, for months. The animal lies in the light like a leaf, and the plant engines inside its skin quietly generate food, and the slug lives partly off sunlight the way a plant does. Think about what that means for survival. This is an animal that has installed solar panels. When food is scarce, when there's no algae to eat, when the environment turns lean, the slug isn't as helpless as an animal should be because it's not fully dependent on finding a meal. It can sit in the light and let its stolen engines carry it. The chloroplasts buffer it against starvation. It has a backup power source that most animals could never dream of, because most animals can't run a plant's machinery inside their own cells. And the leaf shape suddenly makes complete sense. If you're an animal living partly on light, the best thing you can be is flat and spread out. Maximum surface facing the sun, like a leaf turned to catch every photon. The slug's body isn't just disguised as a leaf, it's functioning as one. The shape follows the theft. A body built to eat has been reshaped into a body built to bask. But here's the catch that keeps this from being a clean win, and it's the part that reveals how strange the arrangement really is. The slug can't make its own chloroplasts. It never learned to build the engine. It only knows how to steal it. So the stolen machinery doesn't last forever. Over time, the captured chloroplasts wear down, stop working, break apart. And when they do, the slug has to go back to the algae and steal more. It has to keep re-robbing. The solar panels are secondhand and they degrade, and the animal is locked into a permanent cycle of theft just to keep the lights on. It's not self-sufficient. It's a repeat offender, forced back to its supplier again and again. And now we reach the real cliffhanger of this animal. The question scientists genuinely argue about, the one you should not let anyone answer too cleanly. Because keeping a chloroplast alive is hard. A chloroplast isn't a simple battery you can pull out and plug in. It normally depends on the plant cell around it, on instructions, on support, on genes back in the plant's own nucleus that keep the engine maintained. So how does the slug keep these stolen engines running for weeks or months, cut off from the plant they came from? Where do the maintenance instructions come from? One tempting answer is that maybe the slug has taken more than the engine. Maybe over evolutionary time, it has also taken some of the plant's genes, the instructions for keeping chloroplasts alive, and written them into its own body. That would be horizontal gene transfer, genes jumping from one kind of life into a completely different kind. If it were true, it would mean the slug isn't just borrowing plant machinery, it's partly become a genetic mosaic of plant and animal. And here's where I have to be honest with you, because the temptation is to say that's exactly what happens. It's not settled. Whether these slugs have truly taken plant genes to run their stolen chloroplasts is genuinely debated. Some findings point one way, some another. And the honest state of it is, we don't fully know how the slug keeps those engines alive for so long. That's not a gap I'm going to paper over with a dramatic claim. The uncertainty is the interesting part. This animal is doing something that, by our understanding of how chloroplasts work, is very hard to explain. And the explanation is still open. So sit in that discomfort for a second, because it's earned. We have an animal that is green because it's full of another organism's working engines. It lives partly on sunlight. It's shaped like a leaf to do it. And the mechanism that lets it pull this off may or may not involve stolen genes. And no one gets to tell you for certain yet. What we can say is this: the blue dragon stole a weapon. This slug stole a power source. And that's a bigger theft, because it crosses a bigger line. Not one animal borrowing from another animal, one kingdom of life borrowing the fundamental machinery of a completely different kingdom. An animal running, in part, on the same trick that runs a forest. One small animal hijacking one plant's engines is remarkable, but it's small, a thumb-sized slug lying in a tide pool. Now imagine that same deal. An animal housing photosynthetic partners inside its own body, living on the energy they produce, scaled up. Not one slug. Not one leaf-sized animal. Imagine that partnership repeated across billions of bodies, built layer on layer over thousands of years, until it becomes the largest living structure on the entire planet. A thing you can see from space, built by animals running on captured sunlight. That's not a thought experiment. It's a reef. You've stood next to one maybe, or seen it from a boat, and mistaken it for scenery. A reef looks like landscape. It looks like colored rock. Ridges and boulders and branching stone in impossible blues and golds. Something geological. Something you'd expect to be as dead and solid as a cliff face. Almost everything about that impression is wrong. And the ways it's wrong stack on top of each other, until the thing you thought was rock turns out to be one of the strangest living arrangements on the planet. Start with the first mistake. The reef is not rock, and it's not a plant either. Despite all that color, despite the way it branches and spreads like something growing in a garden, the reef is an animal, or more precisely, it's built by billions of tiny animals, each one called a coral polyp, a small, soft creature, part of the same broad family as jellyfish and sea anemones. A little sac of a body, with a ring of tentacles around a mouth. That's the builder. Multiply it by billions. Stack the limestone skeletons those animals leave behind over thousands of years, and you get the reef. The rock is the accumulated architecture of a colossal number of soft little animals. So the reef is an animal city. That alone should reset how you see it. But that's not the strange part. That's just the correction. The strange part is what's living inside each one of those animals, because a coral polyp can't build a reef on its own. On its own, a coral polyp is a weak little predator, waving its tentacles in the water, catching what small drifting food it can. That's not nearly enough energy to build the largest structures on Earth. Catching scraps from the water doesn't get you a reef. Something has to power all that construction. And the polyp can't power it alone, so it doesn't work alone. Inside its own tissues, packed into its cells, the coral polyp houses a second organism entirely, tiny photosynthetic algae, a partner living inside the animal's body. And those algae do exactly what the leaf slug's stolen chloroplasts did, except here it's not theft. It's a partnership. The algae sit inside the coral, catch sunlight, and turn it into food. And they share that food with the animal housing them. Look at what you're actually seeing when you look at a reef, then. You're seeing an animal that farms plants inside its own body. Each coral polyp is a tiny greenhouse, sheltering a population of photosynthetic partners, living off the sugar they make from sunlight. The animal provides a safe home and some raw materials. The algae provide energy, a steady stream of food generated from light, far more reliable than the scraps the polyp could catch on its own. And on that shared energy, on that quiet exchange happening inside billions of cells at once, the coral builds, layer by layer, skeleton by skeleton, until the partnership has raised a structure so large you can see it from orbit. That's the reef. Not a thing, a deal. A merger between an animal and an organism that lives on sunlight, scaled up until it became the biggest living construction on Earth. Now here's the detail that should genuinely change how you look at a reef photo, because it hides in plain sight in every single one. The color. That famous, unreal coral color. The golds, the greens, the deep browns. That color is mostly not the corals, it's the algae. The photosynthetic partners packed inside the coral's tissue are what give the living reef most of its color. The animal itself is often nearly clear, a pale, translucent little body. What you're admiring when you admire the colors of a healthy reef is, in large part, the second organism showing through. You're looking at the partner, not the host. The reef's beauty is the visible sign that the deal is intact, that the animal is full of living, working, sunlight-catching partners, which means the color is a status light. And that turns out to be the most frightening thing about the whole arrangement, because this partnership can break, and when it breaks, you can watch it happen. The deal between the coral and its algae depends on conditions staying within a certain range, and temperature is the fragile part. Warm the water too much, hold it too warm for too long, and the partnership starts to fail. Under that heat stress, the relationship turns sour. The algae, instead of feeding the coral, become a liability to it. And the coral expels them. It pushes its photosynthetic partners out of its own tissues, casting out the very organisms it was built around. And when the algae leave, the color leaves with them, because the color was always the algae. What's left behind is the coral's own pale, translucent body over a white limestone skeleton. The reef turns bone white, ghostly. We call it bleaching. And now you understand exactly what you're seeing when you see a bleached reef. You're not seeing dye washed out of a rock, you're watching a partnership dissolve. You're watching billions of animals evict the partners that keep them alive. And here's the twist inside the twist, the part that decides whether this is a tragedy or a catastrophe. A bleached coral is not yet a dead coral. Bleaching is abandonment, not death. The animal is still alive under that white. Starving now, running out of its main food source, but alive. If the water cools back down soon enough, the partnership can sometimes be rebuilt. The coral can take algae back in, regain its color, resume the deal, and survive. The status light can come back on, but if the heat holds too long, the starving coral can't wait. The partnership stays broken, the food never comes back, and the animal dies. The white reef becomes a truly dead one, so bleaching is that terrible in-between state. The visible moment when the merger has come apart, and the outcome is still undecided. It's the divorce, caught in progress, before you know whether it ends in reunion or in death. Stand back and feel what this reveals. The largest living structures on Earth, visible from space, ancient, seemingly permanent as stone, are not solid at all. They are entirely conditional. They exist only as long as two different organisms keep cooperating inside the same body. An animal and a thing that lives on light, holding a fragile deal together across billions of cells. Break the deal, and the whole cathedral of limestone is just the tombstone of a partnership that couldn't survive the heat. That's a hybrid in the deepest sense we've reached yet. Not two species crossing to make a third. Not one animal stealing another's weapons or engines. Two entire organisms, fused into a single functioning life, building something neither could build alone, and collapsing the instant their cooperation fails. But notice what the reef still is underneath all of that. It's two organisms sharing one life, the animal and its algae, two partners in one body. There's a stranger version of this, waiting. Because what if it's not two organisms sharing one body, but hundreds of the same organism sharing one body? What if the individual you're looking at isn't a partnership between two kinds of life, but a crowd of near-identical bodies, all clones of each other, so tightly bound together and so divided in their jobs that they've stopped being separate individuals at all and started pretending, convincingly, to be a single animal? There's a thing that drifts at the surface, blue and beautiful and deadly, that you would swear is one creature. It is not one creature. It never was. You've probably seen one wash up on a beach, and someone nearby said the word jellyfish, and everyone nodded, and everyone was wrong. It's beautiful in a way that makes people lean closer than they should. A translucent float sitting on the surface like a blown glass balloon, tinted blue and pink and violet, sometimes with a delicate crest along the top catching the wind like a sail. Below it, trailing down into the water, long threads, tentacles, some of them stretching far deeper than you'd guess from the small float bobbing on top. It looks like a single strange jellyfish that spends its life half in the air and half in the sea. We call it the Portuguese man-o-war. And almost everything about how you just pictured it is a misunderstanding, starting with the belief that you were looking at one animal at all. Here's the correction, and it's a big one. The man-o-war is not a jellyfish, and it's not an individual. That drifting thing on the surface, the one that looks like a single creature, it's a colony, a crowd. Hundreds of separate bodies bound together into something that only pretends to be one animal. Sit with how strange that is before we take it apart, because it's stranger than it sounds. When you look at the man-o-war, you are not looking at one creature with a float and some tentacles. You are looking at a collection of individual bodies, many of them, each a distinct little organism, all fused together and coordinated so tightly that they function as a single life. The animal is a committee, and the committee is so seamless that for most of human history, everyone assumed it was one creature. This kind of animal has a name, a siphonophore. And a siphonophore breaks the most basic assumption you have about what an animal even is. The assumption that one body equals one individual, that an animal is a single unit. The man-o-war is built from that assumption's collapse. Here's how the trick works, and it's genuinely one of the most elegant things in the ocean. The individual bodies that make up the colony are called zooids, and every zooid is, in origin, its own organism. But they don't all do the same thing. They've specialized. Different zooids in the colony have taken on completely different jobs, and each type does only its one job, for the whole colony. Some zooids became the float, that gas-filled bladder that keeps the whole colony at the surface, holds it up to the sun and the wind. That's a body whose entire existence is to be a balloon. Other zooids became the tentacles, the long, trailing, stinging threads that hang down into the water. Their job is to catch prey. They're loaded with stinging cells, and they do the hunting, hauling in food from the water below. Other zooids became the feeders, the bodies that actually digest what the tentacles catch, breaking down the food and sharing the energy through the colony, and other zooids became the reproducers, the bodies whose only job is to make the next generation. Look at that list again. Float, hunt, digest, reproduce. Those are the jobs an organ system does inside a normal animal. In you, those are your lungs, your hands, your stomach, your reproductive organs. Organs, parts of one body. In the man-o-war, each of those organs is a former individual, a separate organism that specialized so completely it became a working part. The man-o-war is an organ system built out of organisms, a body assembled from other bodies, each one reduced to a single function. And here's what locks it together into one life instead of a loose gang. None of them can survive alone. The float can't hunt, the tentacles can't digest, the feeders can't stay at the surface. Each zooid has specialized so far into its one job that it has given up the ability to live independently. Pull them apart, and every piece dies. They are individuals in origin, but they've surrendered their individuality so completely that separation is death. They've traded independence for a shared life. Together, they're an animal. Apart, they're nothing. There's a detail here that closes a loop from earlier, and it's worth pausing on because it rewards you for paying attention. Remember the blue dragon? That small, beautiful slug that steals its weapons, remember what it stole them from? The Portuguese man-o-war. The blue dragon eats the man-o-war's stinging tentacles and harvests their weapons. Now you know exactly what those tentacles are. They're not the arms of a single jellyfish. They're the hunting zooids of a colony, individual bodies, specialized into weapons. So when the blue dragon robs the man-o-war, it's not just stealing a body part. It's stealing the stinging cells that belong to specific member organisms of a colony, the hunter bodies of a crowd. The weapon the slug carries in its own arms was grown by a specialized individual inside a fake animal. The theft is stranger than you knew when you first heard it. Now, one more correction, because it changes how you picture the man-o-war moving. It can't swim. Not really. There's no engine here, no coordinated propulsion. The colony has that gas float on top, and it lives entirely at the mercy of the wind and the current. It drifts. Where the wind pushes, it goes. That crest on top of some of them acts like a sail, so the wind does the steering, which is why they wash up on beaches in huge numbers when the wind turns on shore. The man-o-war doesn't hunt by chasing. It hunts by drifting into things, dragging that long curtain of stinging zooids through the water and killing whatever the threads touch. A passive, wind-blown net of specialized bodies. Feel how far we've come from where this started. We began with hybrids you could grasp, 2 species crossing. Then functional hybrids, animals wearing other animals' weapons and engines. Then the reef, 2 organisms fused into one life. And now the ground shifts under the word individual itself. Because the man-o-war says that even a single animal, the most basic unit you thought you could count on, might not be one thing at all. It might be a crowd wearing one skin. The impossible hybrid here isn't a cross between 2 species. It's the individual itself. Yeah, no. Many bodies, one life, so convincingly merged that we called it a jellyfish and never looked closer. And that reframes everything you thought was solid. If a colony of bodies can pass as one animal this completely, can fool us into a single name, a single creature for this long, then how far can the trick go? The man-o-war is small, a float you could hold in your hand, tentacles you could measure, but the colony trick doesn't have a size limit built into it. If hundreds of bodies can merge into something the size of a balloon, what stops thousands of bodies from merging into something far larger? What's the biggest a fake animal can get before the illusion breaks? Because somewhere in the dark, middle water of the open ocean, drifting in the black between the surface and the deep, there's a colony built on this exact same trick, the same crowd of specialized clones pretending to be one animal that has been measured stretching longer than a whale. One of the longest living things ever seen. And it is not a single creature. It's the man-o-war's cousin. Taken to an extreme that sounds made up. Kill the lights. That's the first thing to understand about where we're going now. The man-o-war lives at the surface, in the wind and the sun. This next one lives nowhere near it. To find it, you have to leave the surface behind and sink, down past where the light fails, down into the open middle water, the vast, dark column between the sunlit top and the distant floor. No bottom in sight, no surface in sight, just black water in every direction, and an ROV's beam carving out a small cone of visibility in an ocean of nothing. And then something drifts into the beam that your mind refuses to read as one thing. It hangs in the water like a rope. A long, glassy, faintly glowing string curling through the dark. And it keeps going. Past the edge of the light, into the black, and back again. Sometimes it's coiled into a vast spiral, a slow helix of living tissue hanging in the middle of the ocean. It's so long that a single camera can't take it all in. You follow it, and it doesn't end where a body should end. This is a giant siphonophore, And it is the man-o'-war's trick, scaled up past the point of belief. Let's fix the misconception first because it's the one everybody carries. When you think of the largest animals in the ocean, you think of whales. Big, single bodies. A blue whale. The largest animal that has ever lived, we're often told. A single, enormous body longer than most buildings are tall. That's what huge ocean animal means to almost everyone. A giant, unified body. Now hold that idea next to this string in the dark, because there's a real argument that one of the longest living things ever recorded in the ocean is not a whale at all. It's this, a siphonophore, and it might stretch longer than a blue whale, one of the longest animals ever seen, hanging in the black water like a living cable. But here's the word that changes everything, and I want to be careful with it. Longest, not largest. Those are different claims, and the difference is the whole story. A whale is the largest, the most mass, the biggest single body. This siphonophore might be the longest, the greatest length, and it achieves that length in a way that has nothing to do with being a big body, because it isn't one body at all. It's the man-o'-war's secret taken to an extreme. This animal is a colony. The same trick, hundreds, but now thousands, of individual zooids, specialized clone bodies, each doing one job, strung together into a single, coordinated life. The man-o'-war packed its colony into a compact float and a curtain of tentacles. This one strings its colony out into a rope thousands of bodies long. It didn't grow a longer body, it added more members. The length is a head count, not a physique. That's why longest and largest split apart here. A whale is long because it grew a long body. This siphonophore is long because it's a chain of thousands of small bodies laid end to end. It cheated the size problem entirely. To get enormous, you don't have to build one enormous body. You can just build a huge crowd and hold it together in a line. Now I have to be honest about the numbers, because this is exactly the kind of place where it's tempting to hand you a hard figure and call it fact. I won't. The reported lengths of the largest siphonophores are estimates, made in difficult conditions. Measuring a faint, coiling, glassy string in deep black water from a moving vehicle is genuinely hard. So when you hear that one of these might be the longest animal ever recorded, hold it as a strong, striking inference, not a settled measurement. The honest claim is, possibly one of the longest. That possibly isn't weakness. It's the accurate state of what we can measure down there. And the fact that we can't even cleanly measure the longest animals in the sea tells you how little of this world we've actually pinned down. But length isn't just a record to marvel at. It's a hunting strategy. And once you see what the length is for, the whole eerie shape makes sense. Think about the problem this animal has to solve. It lives in the open mid-water, one of the emptiest places on Earth. Food down there is scarce and scattered. Small, drifting animals, thinly spread through an enormous volume of dark water. There's no crowd of prey to charge into. There's just a lot of water with a little bit of food dissolved through it. How do you eat when your meals are that rare and that spread out? You cast a net, a living one. That's what the length is. The colony spreads itself out into a vast curtain of stinging bodies. A wall of hunting zooids hanging in the water, sometimes arranged in that slow spiral to cover as much space as possible. Each zooid trails its stinging threads, and then the whole thing just waits, drifting, its enormous net of weapons filtering a huge volume of water. Anything small that blunders into any part of that curtain gets stung, caught, and passed along to the feeding bodies. The colony doesn't chase its scattered food. It becomes large enough to intercept it. A shared net thousands of bodies wide, sweeping the dark for whatever drifts in. So the length solves the scarcity. In a place where food is thin, the animal that can sample the most water wins. and the way to sample the most water is to spread yourself across it. Being longer than a whale isn't vanity. It's reach. It's the difference between starving in the dark and catching enough of the scattered nothing to live. And the glow fits the same dark world, faint light rippling along that string in the black. Light in the deep sea is rarely decoration. It's used to lure, to signal, to startle. A glowing net in a lightless world is a net that can draw prey toward it, or flash to deter something that gets too close. Every feature of this animal is an answer to the same brutal conditions. No light, no bottom, no surface, food spread thin through an endless dark volume. Now step back and feel the vertigo of it. You are looking at something that stretches longer than the largest animal that has ever lived. And it is not an animal in the way you mean the word. It's a crowd, a rope of thousands of clones, each one a specialized fragment of a shared life coordinated so completely that they hunt as one, glow as one, drift as one. Pull it apart and every piece dies, exactly like the man-o-war. The longest living thing in the beam is not a creature. It's a colony wearing the shape of one. And that closes the arc that started at the surface. The man-o-war fooled us into calling a colony a jellyfish. This one fools the very idea of largest animal. Same trick, 2 scales, a hand-sized float, and a rope longer than a whale. Both of them the answer to the same impossible question. How do you become a single life out of a crowd of bodies? But here's the thing that should quietly unsettle you as this drifts back out of the light. These colonies, the man-o-war, this giant string, they're related to jellyfish. They're on a far branch of the tree of life from us. Distant cousins at best, easy to file under alien things in the dark that have nothing to do with me. So what happens when the colony trick shows up not on some distant branch, but on ours? What happens when you find a crowd pretending to be one animal that isn't a jellyfish relative at all, but a chordate, a member of our own group, closer to a fish, closer to you than to anything we've seen so far? Because there's a glowing tube drifting in the open ocean, big enough for a diver to swim inside, that is made of thousands of individual animals. And those animals are, by the shape of the family tree, some of your strangest relatives. There's a moment divers describe that sounds made up. They're in open water, in the blue, and ahead of them hangs a tube, a long, soft, glowing cylinder, open at one end, big enough that a person could swim inside it. It pulses with a faint, cold light, and it is alive, in a way that doesn't resolve into any animal you know. Now, the part that should make your skin prickle, that glowing tube is more closely related to you than a jellyfish is. Hold on to that, because everything in this chapter is going to lean on it. Start with the misconception, and it's one you almost certainly hold without knowing it. When you see something soft, gelatinous, transparent, drifting in the ocean, a blob, a jelly, a glassy thing with no bones and no face, your brain files it in one drawer, primitive, simple, low on the tree of life, unrelated to us. We look at anything jelly-like and assume it's a distant, basic form of life, something that branched off near the bottom and never got anywhere near the animals we care about. The fish, the reptiles, the mammals, us. That instinct is going to fail badly here, because these drifting, glowing, gelatinous things belong to a group called tunicates, and tunicates are chordates. That word is the key. A chordate is a member of our own great branch of the animal kingdom, the branch that includes every animal with a backbone: fish, frogs, birds, whales, you. And tunicates sit on that branch. Not on it as vertebrates. They don't have a backbone as adults, but they're close relatives of the whole backboned lineage, closer to a fish than a jellyfish is, closer to you on the family tree than to the man-o-war we just watched in the dark. That drifting blob you'd have dismissed as primitive ooze is, by ancestry, family. And here's how the disguise holds. A lot of tunicates as adults look like nothing. Soft sacs, drifting tubes, gelatinous blobs. But look at how some of them begin life. And the mask slips. Many tunicates start as a tiny swimming larva that looks a bit like a miniature tadpole. And inside that larva is a stiff supporting rod running down its length. The same fundamental body plan that, elsewhere on the tree, became the backbone. Then the larva settles, transforms, and often throws away that tadpole shape entirely, becoming the drifting blob. The animal hides its kinship in its own life cycle. It wears the badge of our branch only briefly, as a larva, and then discards it. So you look at the adult and see a jelly, but the family tree and the larva tell you the truth. This is a relative. Now let's take the two most spectacular members of this group because each one breaks a different rule. First, the Salp. A salp is a small, barrel-shaped tunicate, clear as glass, that lives by pumping water straight through its own body, drawing water in one end, filtering out the tiny food, jetting it out the other. It feeds and moves with the same motion, and it does something with its life cycle that sounds like two different animals sharing one existence. A salp alternates between two forms. In one generation, it lives as a solitary individual, a single barrel drifting alone. But that solitary salp doesn't make babies the way you'd expect. It buds off a long chain of clones, a whole string of connected salps, all identical, linked together into a single ribbon that swims as one. So the next generation isn't a scatter of separate offspring. It's a chain, a colony. Dozens of clones strung together, pumping and drifting in unison, until they in turn break off and become solitary individuals again, and the cycle flips back. So the salp is a colony sometimes, and a loner other times. It swings between the two, generation after generation. It has the crowd as one body trick built into its life cycle as a phase it moves in and out of. And when food is good, this lets salps do something almost frightening. Because cloning a chain is so fast, salp populations can explode, filling huge stretches of water with pulsing glassy chains almost overnight. Our relative reproduces faster than almost anything by turning itself into a crowd on demand. Then there's the pyrosome. And the pyrosome is the glowing tube the diver swims inside. A pyrosome looks like a single hollow cylinder, sometimes small, sometimes long enough to swallow a person. But it's not one animal, it's thousands. The tube is a colony, thousands of tiny individual tunicates, each one embedded in a shared gelatinous wall, all arranged into that cylinder. Every one of those thousands of little animals pulls water in from the outside of the tube and pumps it into the hollow center. Add up thousands of them pumping in the same direction, and the whole tube slowly jets itself through the water. A colony moving as one body, powered by thousands of individuals, each doing one small thing. It's the man-o'-war's principle again, the crowd wearing one skin. But now the crowd is on our branch of the tree, and the pyrosome glows. Its name means fire body, and it earns it. The tube can light up with a cold, rippling bioluminescence, thousands of animals flashing together across the shared body. What the light is fully for, we hold loosely. Signaling, defense, some interplay we don't completely understand but the effect is unmistakable. A living, glowing sleeve hanging in the open ocean, made of thousands of your distant relatives pulsing with light. Feel what's happened over these last chapters. The colony trick, many bodies, one life, first showed up as a jellyfish relative at the surface, then as a whale-length rope in the dark. And now here it is again, on our own branch of the tree of life. The one body is actually a crowd solution isn't some quirk of a distant alien lineage. It reaches all the way up to the animals closest to us. Even our relatives break the one-body rule. Even on the branch that led to backbones and fish and us, life found the same answer. When it helps, stop being one and become many as one. That's the uncanny part. Not that a glowing tube exists, that it's kin. The blob you'd have dismissed as primitive ooze is a cousin that solved being alive by becoming a committee and lit itself up doing it. But notice something about every colony we've seen. The man-o'-war, the giant siphonophore, the salp chain, the pyrosome, they all become many as one the same way, by cloning. One body copies itself over and over, and the copies stay joined. The crowd is a crowd of identical selves, all descended from one. That's how you build a fake individual out of real ones. You make them yourself. So here's the question that breaks even that. What if the merger isn't between clones? What if two completely separate individuals, two strangers born apart, with different bodies and different histories, could fuse together into a single animal? Not copies of oneself, two selves, permanently joined into one. Because in the black water of the deep sea, there's a fish where exactly that happens, where a male finds a female, bites down, and never lets go. And over time, his body melts into hers, until two animals share one bloodstream, and one of them stops being a separate creature at all. Everyone knows this fish, and everyone knows it wrong. You've seen it, even if only as a cartoon of the deep. The nightmare face from the black water. A gaping mouth crowded with long needle teeth. A body like a dark sack, and rising off the forehead, a thin stalk ending in a glowing lure. A little lamp dangled in front of that terrible mouth to draw prey close in the dark. The anglerfish, the mascot of the deep sea's horrors. Now the correction that unravels the whole picture. That monster you're imagining is only the female, and she is not a single animal. Let's take those one at a time, because each one is stranger than the last. First, the female. Everything you picture when you hear anglerfish, the size, the teeth, the lure, the menace, that's her, and only her. In many of these deep-sea species, the male looks nothing like that. He's tiny, a fraction of her size. No fearsome mouth, no glowing lure, sometimes barely more than a pair of eyes, and a set of nostrils attached to a small swimming body. If you saw the male alone, you'd never connect him to the monster. He doesn't look like a smaller version of her. He looks like a different, lesser creature entirely. And that size difference isn't an accident. It's the setup for one of the strangest survival problems any animal has ever had to solve. Think about where these fish live. The deep, open, black water. The same vast, empty dark we've been sinking through. Food is scarce there. But something else is scarce too, something we haven't talked about. Each other. In that enormous volume of lightless water, animals are spread impossibly thin. For a male anglerfish, the hardest thing in the world isn't finding food, it's finding a female. In all that dark, all that emptiness, two of these fish crossing paths is rare. He might get one chance in his entire life to find a mate. One. So evolution's answer to "you might only find her once" is brutal and permanent. When you find her, never let go. Ever. Here's what the tiny male actually does. When he finally finds a female in the dark, he bites her. He clamps onto her body, her side, her belly, wherever he latches, and he holds on. And then something happens that has almost no parallel anywhere else in the animal world. He doesn't let go and swim away, he stays. And over time, his body begins to fuse with hers. Not metaphorically, physically. His mouth and her skin start to merge. The tissues grow together, seal, connect. The boundary between his body and hers dissolves at the point where he's attached, and it goes deeper than skin. Their circulatory systems join. His blood supply connects to hers. He starts drawing nourishment directly from her body, through their fused flesh, through shared blood. He stops being a separate fish feeding itself. He becomes a permanent attachment to her, living off her bloodstream. And once he's fused, he starts to disappear as an individual. He doesn't need his own eyes anymore. She's the one navigating, hunting, surviving. He doesn't need to find his own food. Her blood feeds him. So those parts of him degenerate. His eyes, his organs, the machinery he needed to live independently. Much of it wastes away because it's no longer needed. What's left is stripped down to the one thing the arrangement requires him to keep, his reproductive function. He becomes, in effect, an organ, a permanently attached source of sperm, fused to her body, fed by her blood, ready whenever she is. Read that back. A male anglerfish in these species doesn't stay a separate animal. He becomes part of the female, a piece of her body that was once a creature of its own. The monster with the lure isn't one fish. She's one fish carrying the fused, dissolved remains of another, wired into her own bloodstream. Two individuals, permanently merged into one. This is the fusion we've been building toward. The colonies got there by cloning. Many copies of oneself joined. This is something else entirely. Two separate individuals, a female and a male, born apart, genetically different, with different bodies and different lives, physically melting into a single organism. Not two copies of oneself, two selves, fused into one. And here's where I have to stop you from accepting the easy version, because there's a genuine mystery buried in this that scientists are still working on. Think about what fusion requires. When two separate individuals join their tissues and their blood, there's a problem, a serious one. Your body has an immune system whose entire job is to attack anything that isn't you. It recognizes foreign tissue and destroys it. That's why transplants are so difficult. The body fights the foreign organ. So how can a male anglerfish fuse his body into a female's, merge tissue, share blood, without her immune system attacking him as the intruder he is? Two different individuals, then joining flesh and bloodstream, should trigger exactly the kind of immune rejection that makes such a thing impossible. And yet it happens, the fusion holds, the male isn't rejected. Somehow in these fish, the normal immune barrier that keeps one individual separate from another is relaxed, altered, gotten around. But how? That's the part I won't pretend is solved. The immune mechanism that allows this fusion, that lets two individuals share a body without the host destroying the guest, is an area of active research, not a closed case. There are ideas, investigations, pieces of the puzzle. But the full explanation of how these fish switch off the barrier that should make fusion impossible is not something I can hand you as settled fact. And that gap is the most interesting thing here, because whatever these anglerfish are doing to their own immune systems is something that, by our normal understanding of how bodies defend themselves, shouldn't be so easy. And they do it in the dark, routinely, as their way of reproducing. So sit with the whole thing. The famous monster is only half the animal. The male gives up his eyes, his organs, his independence, everything except the one function he's kept, to become a permanent part of the female. Two animals become one, sharing a single bloodstream held together by an immune truce we don't fully understand. The individual cracks apart again, exactly as it did with the colonies, but by the opposite route. The colonies were one self pretending to be many. This is two selves collapsing into one. And notice the direction we're moving. The man-o-war was clones bound together. The anglerfish is a male fusing into a female. Two individuals, but of the same species, in a fixed relationship, one dissolving into the other. It's fusion, but it's lopsided. He melts into her. She stays herself, just carrying him. So here's the door that opens next, and it's the most unsettling one yet. The male fuses into the female. But what if fusion didn't need a male and a female? What if it didn't need one body to dissolve into another? What if two individuals of the same kind, two equals, two strangers, two complete animals, could simply press together and merge? Not one becoming part of the other, both becoming a single new animal, with one shared nervous system, one shared gut, two selves poured into one body? Because there's a creature in the sea, simple and glassy and easy to overlook, where two separate individuals can fuse into a single one. And afterward, they move as if they were one animal all along. And when that happens, there's a question that has no comfortable answer. If two of them become one, who is the animal that's left? This one doesn't have a face to fear or a monster's reputation. That's part of why what it does hits so hard. It's a comb jelly, a ctenophore. Picture a small, glassy, oval thing drifting in the water, almost invisible, its body run through with rows of tiny beading structures that catch the light and split it into shimmering, rippling color as it moves. It looks fragile, delicate, simple. Something you'd glance at and file as one of the ocean's least remarkable drifters, a transparent blob with a light show. And this fragile, simple-looking thing does something that quietly undermines the idea of being a single self. Here's the assumption it breaks. When an animal is injured, torn, damaged, split, we expect it to heal back into itself. That's what a body does. It repairs its own boundaries. It knits its own wounds closed and remains the one animal it always was. Your body doesn't fuse with the person next to you when you're hurt. It seals itself off and stays you. The edge of an individual is supposed to be a hard line. Self on the inside, everything else out. Comb jellies, it turns out, may not hold that line the way everything else does, because two of them, under the right circumstances, can be pressed together. And instead of staying two, instead of rejecting each other, instead of healing back into two separate individuals, they fuse. They merge into a single comb jelly. Two animals become one. I want to be careful and honest with you here, because this is new. This is a recent finding from limited observation, and I'm not going to inflate it into something bigger than it is. This isn't an ancient, well-cataloged behavior we've watched 1,000 times across the whole group. It's a striking, recent, still being understood result. The kind of thing that makes scientists lean in and say we need to look at this much more closely. So hold it as what it is, a real observation, genuinely strange, not yet a fully mapped rule of how all comb jellies live. The uncertainty is part of the story, not a flaw in it. What was seen is remarkable enough without overstating how general it is. And what was seen is this: two comb jellies brought together, merged into one body. And the merger wasn't just skin deep, wasn't just two blobs sticking together on the outside. It went into the systems that matter most. Start with the nervous system, because this is the part that should stop you. A comb jelly doesn't have a brain the way you do. No central command center, no single knot of tissue running the show. What it has is a nerve net. Nerves spread through the body in a diffuse web, coordinating movement without a headquarters. And when two comb jellies fuse, their nerve nets appear to join. The two separate webs of nerves connect into one. The signals that told one animal's body what to do start running through both. There's no longer a wall between one jelly's nervous system and the other's. They share it. And you can see the result because the fused animal moves like one animal. Those shimmering rows of beating structures, the ones that ripple with light, start to contract in a coordinated way across the whole merged body. Not one half doing its own thing, and the other half doing something else. The two former individuals pulse together, synchronized, as if a single mind, or a single nerve net, which is as close to a mind as this animal has, is running the whole thing. Two nervous systems became one, and the one body now moves as one. Then, the gut. Because the merger goes there, too. When the two fuse, their digestive systems connect. The two guts, once separate, join into a shared system. Food taken in by what used to be one animal can move into the space that used to be the other. They don't just share a nervous system. They share the process of eating and digesting. One animal's meal becomes both bodies' meal because there are no longer two bodies in any way that counts. There's one body, one nerve net, one gut, made from two. Sit in how strange this is. Two individuals, each one a complete animal, each with its own history of drifting and feeding and surviving, pressed together and did not reject each other. There was no immune war, no scarring line between them, no defense of the boundary. They accepted each other completely. Tissue joined tissue, nerve joined nerve, gut joined gut. And what came out the other side was a single comb jelly that moves and eats as one, carrying the merged substance of two former selves with no visible seam between them. And that forces the question this chapter is really about, the one with no comfortable answer. If two of them merge into one, who is the animal that's left? It's not the first one. It's not the second one. It's not simply both sitting side by side because there aren't two anymore. There's one nerve net, one gut, one coordinated body. The two selves didn't survive as two, but they didn't fully vanish either. The new animal is made of both. So the individual that's left is neither and both, a single self assembled from two, where the question of which one is it stops having an answer, because the thing that made them two separate answers has dissolved. That's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, more than any set of teeth or venom. Everything we've looked at chipped away at the idea of a single, separate individual. The colonies said one animal might be a crowd. The anglerfish said two animals might collapse into one, lopsidedly, one dissolving into the other. And now the comb jelly says two equals, two complete separate selves, can merge into one, sharing the very systems we'd point to as the seat of who an animal is. The nervous system, the gut. The boundary of the self isn't a hard line at all. In this animal, it's optional. It can be crossed. Two can become one. And afterward, there's no way to pull them back apart into who they were. Think about what that does to the word individual. The word we started this whole journey trusting. We began with hybrids, two species crossing, and it felt safe because there were still clearly two parents and one offspring. Now we've reached a place where an animal can be built by two individuals fusing, where the line around a single self can simply open up and let another self in. The sealed box we imagined each creature living in. One body, one self, one set of boundaries, was never sealed. In the comb jelly, it doesn't even pretend to be. So we've watched bodies merge with each other, clones into colonies, a male into a female, two selves into one comb jelly. Every one of them a fusion between animals, same kingdom, same broad kind of life joining flesh to flesh. But there's one more boundary left, and it's the biggest one of all. Not the line between two individuals, not even the line between two species. The line between two entirely different forms of life, an animal, and the microbes that are supposed to be separate from it, invisible, other, not part of the body at all. Because in the darkest, hottest, most poisonous corners of the deep sea, there are animals that fuse not with each other, but with bacteria. animals that gave up eating entirely and let another form of life become the engine inside them. And down there, in water that should kill anything, that fusion is the only reason life exists at all. Go all the way down now, past the last of the light, past the cold middle water, all the way to the floor, and then find the one place down there that breaks every rule you have left. In the pitch dark of the deep sea floor, there are cracks where the planet bleeds heat. Hydrothermal vents, places where seawater sinks into the crust, gets superheated by the rock below, and comes roaring back up scalding hot and loaded with chemicals. The water gushing out is hot enough to cook, black with dissolved minerals, and thick with chemicals that are, to most life, simply poison. Toxic gas pouring out of the seabed in the freezing dark. It should be one of the deadliest places on Earth. Instead, it's one of the most crowded. And clustered around those poison chimneys thriving in water that should kill them are animals that solved survival by doing something no textbook animal is allowed to do. They stopped eating. Start with the strangest of them, the giant tube worm. Picture a forest of long white tubes anchored to the rock around a vent, each one taller than a person. And out of the top of each tube blooms a plume of deep, blood-red flesh, swaying in the toxic current. That red plume is the only part that shows. The rest of the animal lives sealed inside its tube. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. This animal has no mouth, no gut, no stomach, no digestive tract, nothing to eat with, and nothing to eat into. As an adult, it cannot eat. By every rule we've carried this whole time, the rule that an animal must consume other living things to survive, the giant tube worm should be impossible. An animal with no way to feed itself should be dead. It isn't dead. It's one of the fastest growing, most successful animals down there. So where does its food come from? From inside. From another form of life, living within its body. Sealed inside the tube worm is a specialized organ packed, absolutely packed, with bacteria. Billions of them. Living inside the worm's own tissue. And these bacteria can do something the worm can't. They can take the toxic chemicals pouring out of the vent, the very poison in that water, and use them as fuel. They pull energy out of vent chemistry and turn it into food, not from sunlight the way plants and the reef's algae do, from chemistry, from the poison itself. It's a whole way of making a living called chemosynthesis, building food from chemical energy in total darkness, where no sunlight has ever reached. The bacteria make the food, and they share it with the worm that houses them. The tube worm doesn't eat because it doesn't need to. It farms. Its entire body is a housing unit and a life support system for the microbes that feed it. The animal gave up eating and became a home for the thing that eats for it. And now that blood-red plume makes terrible sense. Why is it red? For the same reason your blood is red. It's full of hemoglobin, the molecule that carries gases through a body. But the tube worm's blood isn't just carrying oxygen. It's carrying the vent chemicals, the poison, down to the bacteria inside it, delivering the toxic fuel its microbes need. That red plume is a chemical intake, waving in the current, grabbing the very poison that would kill almost anything else, and ferrying it inward to feed the life it depends on. The animal built a body specifically to gather poison and hand it to its microbial engine. That's a fusion deeper than anything we've seen. The anglerfish fused two individuals. The comb jelly fused two selves. This is an animal fused with an entirely different kingdom of life, bacteria, so completely that it can't survive without them and abandoned its own digestive system to make room for them. Two forms of life, one body, one shared existence in the poison and the dark. And the tube worm isn't alone in this. Look nearby on the rocks around the vent, and you'll find the Yeti crab. And it plays the same trick from the other side. The Yeti crab is pale, almost ghostly, and its claws and arms are covered in dense, hairy bristles that make it look like it's wearing fur. But that fur isn't for warmth, and it isn't decoration. It's a farm. Those bristles are thick with bacteria, the same kind of chemical-feeding microbes growing on the crab's own body, and the crab tends them. It's been observed waving its claws over the vent flow, bathing its bacteria in the chemical-rich water they need to grow, feeding its crop, keeping it alive. And then it eats them. It grazes the bacteria off its own arms. The crab grows its food on its body, fertilizes it in the poison stream, and harvests it. It's a farmer whose field is its own limbs. Two different animals, the worm and the crab, both landing on the same impossible answer. Don't hunt in a place with nothing to hunt. Partner with microbes that can eat poison, house them, or grow them, and live off what they make. Now pull back and see the whole thing, because this is the part that rewrites the deep sea entirely. Everything you know about food chains starts with the sun. Sunlight feeds plants, plants feed animals, and on up the line. Every ecosystem you learned about traces back to light. But down at the vents, there is no sun, and there never was. No light has ever reached that place. And yet there's a thriving, crowded ecosystem, worms, crabs, and more packed around the chimneys. That entire community is built on a foundation that has nothing to do with sunlight. It runs on chemistry, on poison, on the heat and gas bleeding out of the planet itself. And the foundation of that whole sunless world is fusion. Animal-microbe partnerships, the tube worm and its internal bacteria, the Yeti crab and its farmed crop. The base of this ecosystem isn't a plant, it's animals merged with microbes, converting the planet's own toxic breath into life. Down here, in the harshest, hottest, most poisonous corner of the sea, life doesn't just tolerate the impossible conditions. It's built entirely on hybrids, on animals that fused with another kingdom to survive where nothing should survive at all. Feel how far we've come from the surface. We started with two dolphins that shouldn't have bred. We've watched animals steal weapons, steal engines, share bodies, fuse with each other. And now, at the very bottom, we find the most complete fusion of all. Animals that outsource the most basic thing an animal does, eating, to a completely different form of life, and thrive in the dark because of it. And that leaves us with a thought that changes the whole picture. If life this blended, this fused, this mixed across every boundary, is what thrives in the most extreme place in the ocean, then the blending was never the exception. The tidy idea we started with of pure, separate species living pure, separate lives was the illusion. Down here, where conditions are hardest, life didn't stay separate. It merged. And it merged because merging was the only way through. So maybe the whole way we've been counting, one animal, one species, one sealed self, was never the ocean's rule at all. Maybe it was ours, a rule we brought with us from land, and kept expecting the sea to obey. Let's go back to the beginning, to that small blue thing drifting upside down at the surface, wearing weapons it stole from something deadlier than itself. When we started, it looked like a freak, an exception, a single strange animal that broke the rules. It doesn't look like an exception anymore. After everything we've seen, it looks like a member of a pattern, one of many, many answers to the same question. And the question was never, how did this one weird animal happen? The question is bigger and stranger, and it's the one this whole journey was really about. Why does the ocean keep doing this? Why does the sea over and over produce animals that shouldn't hold together and almost always finds a way to make them work? Because look at what we actually found. We found two dolphins we'd filed as different kinds of animal, close enough underneath to breed and pass it down. We found sharks, the finished, unchanging design, quietly crossing in open water. Maybe because the ocean around them is moving. We found a whale confirmed from a single misfiled skull, two hyper-specialized Arctic species blended into one. We found the animal that looks most like a hybrid, the ghost shark, and learned it isn't one at all. That looks lie, and the real blending is never about appearance. Then we found the real blending, a slug wearing its prey's weapons, a slug running on a plant's stolen engines, a reef that's an animal farming sunlight through a partner living in its cells, a jellyfish that's a crowd of specialized bodies, a rope longer than a whale that's a colony, not a creature, glowing tubes made of thousands of our own distant relatives, a fish built from two individuals fused into one bloodstream, two comb jellies melting into a single self, and animals at the bottom of the sea that stopped eating and fused with bacteria to live on poison in the dark. Line them up, and something becomes obvious. These aren't a collection of unrelated freaks. They're variations on one theme. Every single one of them crossed a boundary we thought was solid. The line between two species, between two individuals, between two kingdoms of life, between oneself and another. And the sea crossed those lines so casually, so repeatedly, in so many different ways, that you have to stop and ask whether the lines were ever really there. Here's the answer this whole thing has been circling toward. On land, the idea of separate sealed species holds up pretty well. Animals meet as whole bodies. Mating is deliberate and physical. The boundaries between kinds of life feel firm because up here in the air, they mostly are. And that's where we got our tidy picture, the neat chart of separate species, each in its own box, each staying itself. We built that picture on land, in air, in a world where the boundaries happen to be firm. Then we took that picture and expected the ocean to obey it. And the ocean doesn't, because the water changes everything. Think about what water does. So much of ocean life reproduces by releasing eggs and sperm straight into the sea, casting them out into the current and letting them find each other in open water. Fertilization happens out in the drift, not between two carefully matched bodies. That means the barriers that keep species apart on land, the deliberate body-to-body barriers, are far weaker out there. Sperm and eggs from species that shouldn't mix are floating in the same water, meeting by chance. The wall between two species is lower when the meeting happens in the current, instead of between two animals that chose each other. And it's not just species. The water keeps everything in constant, intimate contact with each other and with the microbes that fill every drop of it. Life in the sea is soaking in other life at all times, pressed together, drifting into each other, awash in bacteria. In conditions like that, the boundary between my body and another organism is under constant pressure. Contact is the default. Merging is always on the table. A slug drifts into its prey and keeps its weapons. A coral takes algae into its cells. A worm lets bacteria become its gut. Two comb jellies touch and don't let go. None of that requires some rare accident. It requires exactly what the ocean provides: constant contact, weak barriers, and a reward every time for the ones that blend. So the hybrids were never the exception. They were the ocean showing you its real nature. In a world of drifting sperm and eggs, overlapping ranges, endless contact, and microbes in every drop, blending isn't a freak event. It's a recurring solution. When the environment is hard and open and crowded, teaming up With a partner species, a plant, a colony of your own clones, a fused second self, or a whole other kingdom of microbes, is one of the most reliable ways through. The ocean keeps producing impossible hybrids for the simplest reason there is. Down there, blending works. And it works often enough that it's not the strange case. It's a rule we couldn't see because we were reading from the land's chart the whole time. And I want to be careful right at the end. The same way we've been careful the whole way down. This isn't a claim that every boundary dissolves, or that species don't mean anything, or that we've measured exactly how often any of this happens. We haven't. How common these crossings are, how far the gene sharing really goes, how general the strangest fusions are. A lot of that is still open, still being worked out, still honestly uncertain. The point isn't that the ocean has no order. The point is that its order was always more porous than the one we imagined, leakier, more willing to cross its own lines than the tidy chart ever allowed. So here's where we end. Pull back from that last vent, from the red plumes and the poison and the dark. Rise up off the floor, back through the black middle water where the whale-long colony drifts, back past the fish fused into one another, up through the layers, until the animals fade below you, and there's nothing but open black water and a single narrow beam of light cutting into it. Look at that beam, that thin cone of light in the dark. That's us. That's everything we've actually seen. Every animal in this entire journey was inside that one small circle of light, in one thin slice of an ocean that goes down and out in every direction, most of it never lit, never watched, never named. We didn't survey the sea and find a handful of exceptions. We lit up a narrow beam and in just that beam found this many ways for life to cross every line we drew. Imagine what's drifting in the dark on either side of the light. The word we started with was shouldn't. Every animal here was something that shouldn't exist, but shouldn't was never nature's word. It was ours. An expectation we carried down from a world of air and firm boundaries into a place that never agreed to it. These animals didn't break the rules. They revealed them. The rules were just never the ones we assumed. And the beam is still narrow, and the water on either side of it is still dark.